And during our speaker's presentation, we're going to ask that your cameras be off and your microphones muted. Also, you may ask questions in the chat box as we go along, and at an appropriate time, your question will be presented. And then at the end, after about 50 minutes, 55 minutes, there'll be a time for open question and answer where you can turn your screen and mic on if you wish. Okay, I'm just seeing, it looks like everybody's in so far. So just going to ask for people to turn their camera off if they could. And I will just give a little intro to our speaker tonight. So the MCLD is very pleased to welcome Dr. Jeffrey Derevensky, who is a James McGill Professor and Director of Clinical Training in School and Applied Child Psychology and Professor in the Department of Psychiatry at McGill University. He's also a clinical consultant and has been doing a lot of lectures and workshops around the globe during this sabbatical year. He's also director of the McGill University Youth Gambling Research and Treatment Clinic and the International Center for Youth Gambling Problems and High-Risk Behaviors. So without any further ado, Jeff, would you like to take it away?
Sure. Well, thank you, Roberta. And I want to thank Pam Wiener also, who initially contacted me about this presentation. So I want to welcome everyone, and hopefully your kids are not gaming while you're online. But I'd like to share with you some of the work that we've been doing on gaming in particular, what some of the concerns are. I was a consultant to the World Health Organization when we decided to include gaming or problem gaming or disordered gaming within their classification of diseases and in terms of problems that we've been seeing with not only young people, but also with adults as well. But I'd like to suggest to you that there is some good about gaming, but there's also some negative things about gaming. What I hope to show you is some of the positive things and some of the potential negative things, and also where you could go for more resources. So what's so different today? Well, today's youth are really technologically sophisticated. They're very well adapted in terms of looking at using iPads or laptops, smartphones. And in fact, all of these things have brought gaming to the forefront where it can be done 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And here you see a couple of young kids working on their iPads, and it can be pretty exciting for people as well. And our teenagers are really stuck to their smartphones. In fact, I was giving a talk to the Junior Chamber of Commerce here in Montreal about smartphones and technology, and I'd asked how many people were addicted to their smartphones, and everyone raised their hand. And we could take these things, these smartphones or our laptops or our iPads into beds with us. And here you see a picture. This comes from South Korea, where there are gaming parlors with sophisticated computers, high-speed internet, and these gaming parlors are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. One of the things that we've learned over time is that in the Southeast Asia corridor, this is an even greater problem than here in North America. But if you look at problem gaming severity on a continuum, you could see you could go from someone who's not gaming to someone who we would call social, recreational, occasional gambling, or those who are starting to develop problems. We may refer to them as at-risk gamers. and then eventually you get to a gaming disorder. And what you see here is the largest number of individuals actually are what we would refer to as social, recreational, or occasional gamblers. Then there's a group that's non-gaming, and then there's a group where these individuals are starting to show some problem behaviors, but not have reached clinical criteria for a gaming disorder. And eventually we have individuals who have a full-blown gaming disorder. There are many genres of games. And again, here you see some good games. We have awesome brain games. We have chess. We have other workshops and other websites that are designed to entice young people to go on their sites by playing all kinds of games and learning a wide variety of skills. These are just a few examples of some of the popular ones that are very, very helpful. Given the pandemic and most people are online, especially when their kids were off from school, they're all often playing many of these educational games. But we also have a whole genre of games, and these are some of the popular ones that are adventure games, or sometimes referred to as shoot 'em up games and sports games. Grand Theft Auto is a very popular game played by young people, as well as Minecraft. And those of you may recall Candy Crush that adults really fell in love with in terms of playing. Fortnite, and I'm sure many of the parents have children who are playing Fortnite. Fortnite is by far one of the most popular games now, and you can play for free, and this one is Battle Royale. Just to give you some idea, Fortnite has over 350 million worldwide users. It's free to play initially, yet the revenues are in excess of $4.2 billion. And they get that money by selling upgrades and other merchandise. Some parents are actually hiring coaches for their children to improve their skills. There's prize money for tournaments. And what's important to note is there are currently a number of class action lawsuits pending concerning security breaches and the addictive nature of the game itself. But here you see a number of aftermarket products that are designed and associated with Fortnite as a game. If we want to look at some of the potential problems, if we look at it as either from a biological perspective, a psychological perspective, or a social context perspective, there's an overlap here in terms of looking at positive health and well-being of our children, or in fact of adults as well. I'm going to run through these slides fairly quickly, but you will have a copy of these as well. And if anyone likes the slides or would request the slides, if they just send me an email, I'm more than happy to forward those slides. And this is being taped as we go through. But why is gaming so popular? Well, psychologists have defined this as a freemium model. That is, you're free to play. It provides a temporary escape from either schoolwork or mundane activities. It provides some social connection and interactions. It represents a community and culture in and of itself. And many of the young people, when we say, well, we want you to cut back, they'll argue that if I cut back, I'm not really interacting with my friends any longer. There is measurable growth. There's purpose and meaning to the games. And the games are fully immersive and provide hyperstimulation. And we'll talk a little bit about how that interacts with children with learning disabilities. But it's important to understand that that's one of the reasons why young people go to these games. They use behavioral psychology to keep people in the game. It becomes a safe place to play. You can experiment on these games, and you could fail without any problems, and you just start all over in the game. Clearly, these games provide a source of entertainment and recreation. You can compete against others. There are a lot of challenges and opportunities for achievement. So young people who are not being very successful in school-related activities or in work-related activities can actually develop a very strong self-esteem because they've been playing these games. We know that many of the games encourage fantasy or role-playing. It could provide a relief of stress and passing time or relief from boredom. And this becomes really, really critical in understanding why young people in particular are so attracted to gaming. So here's some quick facts. Since the 1990s, they've become much more technologically sophisticated. They've increased in popularity. The games are easily accessible via computers, tablets, game consoles, and smartphones. So you literally have a walking computer with your smartphone, and you could be playing these games while you're in a car, while you're on an airplane, or wherever you're planning on going on a bus. There are actively over 2 billion gamers worldwide, and 97% of teenage boys have reported playing video games, and about 83% of teenage girls also report playing video games. Excessive gaming has become one of the leading causes of college dropouts, and 48% of student gamers report gaming keeps them from studying. It interferes with their academic studies, but interestingly enough, 9% of young people say they use gaming for that reason. It becomes an alternative to studying or doing your academic work. There are primarily two categories of gamers. One is those that are referred to as online gaming, where they're played simultaneously with people who communicate with each other in real time. And then there's the offline gaming, which are typically played alone, often on consoles, and they have a well-defined start and end. Online gamers tend to spend more time, report having more online friends, and report more game satisfaction overall. 70% of gamers prefer online games compared to offline games, and these online games are likely to be, gamers are likely to be much more problematic. But it's important to note that for a gaming disorder to be officially diagnosed as such, the behavior pattern must be of sufficient severity to result in some impairment in either personal, family, social, educational, occupational, other important areas of functioning. And the World Health Organization basically said these types of behaviors normally should be evident for at least 12 months. Under extreme circumstances, it doesn't have to be that long in terms of duration. And as I mentioned earlier, gaming has become one of the leading causes of college dropouts, where students are doing it excessively and not able to study because they're gaming. And the worldwide estimates suggest anywhere between 1% to 9% of gamers are at risk of an addiction. And we tend to view disordered gaming now as an addiction. And as you'll see in terms of assessment later on, in some ways it's very similar to a gambling problem. A recent study in Sweden found that 9.8% of adolescents, and again, more heavily on boys, in a clinical sample, those people who are having difficulties seem to also have a difficulty in terms of gaming. Internet gaming disorders and anxiety was found amongst 92%. Depression, 89%, attention deficit hyperactive disorders, 85% of individuals, social phobia, 75%, social media and gaming helps strengthen friendships and provides emotional support for young people. And that's one of the chief reasons why they actually do this. And you will ask the children who seem to have very few friends, do you have friends? And they basically say, yes, I have a lot of friends. I have a friend in Hong Kong. I have a friend in Singapore. I have a friend in the US, because they get together playing these games and they provide emotional support for each other. If you're gaming 30 hours a week or more, this has been clearly associated with a gaming disorder. Now, there's some caveats to that, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that, because if you're gaming excessively during summer breaks or March break, as an example, then it may not be as problematic as if you're doing this during the week and during the school year. While many games are free to begin, individuals also use microtransactions, or their ability to pay, to purchase items or to open what are now referred to as loot boxes, where you can actually buy items that will enhance your gaming. Again, it fulfills many different emotional and psychological needs. They're intentionally designed to keep you playing. They're fully immersive, and they provide a dopamine rush. And it's a safe place to fail. Real world failures can often be very permanent, whereas gaming, all it means is restarting the game. And gaming has become normalized and widely socially accepted. So from the perspective of what are some of the good aspects, it does provide relaxation and distraction. It can provide stress reduction. It can minimize loneliness and boredom. It provides escape from reality, and sometimes people need that. It provides a venue for interaction. There are employment opportunities. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later on. But today, when you ask young people, what do you want to do when you grow up? One of the things they'll often say is, I want to be a game developer. And in Montreal, we have a number of major game corporations where they're hiring people to help develop new games. And some young people also want to become game bloggers, where they can actually make some money just telling people how to improve their own games. These games can be educational and provide learning opportunities. They help individuals maintain some social relationships, and they provide social and emotional support. Can be an opportunity to meet new friends, to share with friends, increase their self-esteem or their self-concept. And in fact, in some ways, it can enrich their lives. But like the good part, there's also some bad parts to potential gaming. It can impede face-to-face interaction. It can result in difficult family and peer relationships. I get calls at least twice a week from moms who say, my son or daughter won't speak with me. They won't come up for dinner because all they want to do is continue playing their games. It can interfere with educational employment responsibilities, and a number of corporations now prohibit their employees from playing games. Some universities are now starting to say you can't go on certain sites while you're using your laptop in a class. It can interfere with one's health, such as eating, exercising. Sleep disorders are often accompanied with gaming disorders. It can increase aggressive thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And there's a little transfer of learning from gaming to other academic tasks. So you could play on Fortnite from now till doomsday, and yet it won't necessarily help you in terms of learning any concepts that you need or that are being taught in school. It becomes a source of conflict between parents and children. While we often tell our children, here's the laptop, here's the computer, go play a few games, but set time and limits, and young people have real difficulty doing that. As I mentioned earlier, it can become costly through these, what are referred to as microtransactions, and it may interfere with help-seeking behaviors because they don't see anything wrong with this. But if we really want to look at the negative, real negative side, the ugly side of gaming, it can result in an addiction. And the World Health Organization and the American Psychiatric Association are very, very concerned. I do a lot of webinars such as this one for child and adolescent psychiatrists internationally. This is a growing problem. It can result in increasing frequency in terms of how often they play, how long they play, and how intense it becomes. And what we know is that from an addictive perspective, it becomes the most important activity in the person's life and dominates his or her thinking, feelings, and behavior. And it can result in unpleasant emotional, physical states when they try to cut down or they stop their behavior. And it can result in the neglect of other activities. So they may not want to, as it gets warmer, they may not want to be going outside, interacting with peers, even in a safe distance, but many of the hobbies and their interests and interpersonal relationships seem to be failing for these individuals. So the question then becomes, when is gaming too much? And there are a number of factors to consider. The question that's most often asked to me is, how much time can my child play in a safe way? And part of that is very age related. So younger children have less opportunity to engage in these behaviors for longer and longer periods of time. If, on the other hand, the older child is neglecting his schoolwork, or if it's a young adult who's neglecting their work, or their marriage, or their relationships, then this becomes important. The context becomes important because, as I mentioned previously, if an individual is gaming more during the summer when he or she has fewer responsibilities, then that becomes less problematic. However, if they're gaming and they have an assignment that's due or an exam that's coming up, then that becomes more problematic. And the question then becomes, is it resulting in some impairment or difficulty? Are their grades suffering? Or is the relationship with their parents or siblings suffering? The question also is, can children self-monitor and regulate their behavior? This becomes an important consideration. And no matter how often children say they can self-monitor and regulate their behavior, it becomes difficult. You set the timer and you say you could game for 20 minutes. At that 20-minute period or 19 minutes, the parent says, okay, you're getting close, you have to stop gaming. But Mom, I've never gotten this high. Or I can't disappoint my friends. Are there health-related concerns? Are they looking at sleeping disorders? We've had a mom who called and said, unless I bring my son's food to him in the basement where he's gaming, he won't eat. And here you see that 20 to 29 hours a week tends to be a red flag, and then 30 or more hours, as I previously mentioned, tends to be a real problem. What has happened during the pandemic? Well, gaming has become the go-to form of entertainment for people in quarantine. This is particularly true for young people. There's been a 73% growth in revenues of over $1.5 billion worldwide, Fortnite alone increased by 28 million players, and you see similar increases in the US, France, the UK, and in Germany. But I want to suggest to you that problem gaming does not exist in a vacuum. So when you have lots of anxiety, there's an intersection with problem gambling, depression, conduct disorders, other mental health issues, learning problems, parental problems. And in some ways, we could insert each of these different circles into the center and move problem gambling out. But problem gambling intersects with all of these different issues that an individual is experiencing. Just to show you the negative impacts of problem gambling, you could see we developed this schematic where it interferes with personal issues, with financial issues, with interpersonal issues, and with work-study issues. And each of these in and of itself can become highly problematic. So how do you assess if your child or your partner or a friend has an internet gaming disorder? Well, the World Health Organization, as I mentioned earlier, came out with a definition where you're looking at a pattern of gaming, which is characterized by impaired control, the inability to stop whenever you want, increasing priorities given to gaming over other activities, where it takes precedent over those interests and daily activities, and continues or escalates the gaming despite the occurrence of negative consequences. Now, negative consequences is often very subjective. So when we think a child has a negative consequence because of their gaming, the individual may not view that as a negative consequence. And the behavior pattern has to be of sufficient severity to have an impact on either personal, family, social, educational, occupational, other important areas. And as I mentioned earlier, at least 12 months. These are, again, I'm just running through these quickly. You will have these slides made available to you, but you could see this comes from the American Psychiatric Association definition of an internet gaming disorder. And these are on the left, you can see 9 different criteria for identifying a gaming disorder. And those can be, one can specify it as being either mild, moderate, or severe. What about help for gaming disorders? There are online help and support groups for parents, for gamers, and actually professionals. So very much like Alcoholics Anonymous or Gamblers Anonymous, there's something that's called Online Gamblers Anonymous, Gamers Anonymous organization. A growing number of professionals have become trained to deal with youth gaming problems, and we're working with a large number of groups now in terms of training psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, mental health professionals in how to deal with youth gaming problems. There are some specialty clinics and where they're inpatient treatment clinics in China, South Korea, the US, and the UK. There are none right now in Canada, but it becomes something that people are beginning to look at quite seriously. There's the question of harm reduction versus abstinence. It becomes very difficult for children to give up gaming altogether. So what we try to do is suggest that let's go for harm reduction. Let's try to cut back the gaming, minimize the negative aspects associated with that. And then there are traditional cognitive behavioral treatment models that some psychologists and psychiatrists may use, in where they're trying to identify some of the underlying causes. So that becomes important in terms of minimizing the potential to go back or to relapse into harm, more gaming. And there's skill training in terms of how best to use time rather than gaming. How can you look at other types of activities? And part of that, when we talk about some of the parenting things that you could do, is to also try to engage your children rather than them just sitting around and not doing anything, and then it becomes, they turn back to gaming. So here's some tips for parents. The first is, don't call your child an addict or say they are addicted. They in fact may be addicted to the game, but just saying that is confrontational, it's stigmatizing, and it's hurtful. Rather, discuss the behavior, discuss what you're concerned about. When children believe, we've done a number of studies at McGill that show when you say they're addicted, they make the analogy with substance abuse. And so they will say, this is definitely not nearly as harmful as being addicted to smoking or other forms of substance abuse. Individuals often game to escape, but what is it that they're trying to escape? They may be escaping academic difficulties, parental conflict, social and interpersonal problems. So understanding that they want to game more in order to escape, trying to identify what it is they're escaping from and trying to ameliorate those things can be very, very helpful. And parents are an important role model. Parents shouldn't be gaming on playing their own games on their laptops and then tell the children at the same time that it's not a good idea for them to play. So parents become an important role model also with respect to gaming. As I mentioned earlier, gaming is not just for children or adolescents, but rather quite a few adults are also gaming. Lying and deception are common. They will often tell you about time spent gaming, the amount of money invested. You should monitor your credit cards, because most children don't have credit cards, fortunately, that they could use in order to buy objects or to buy more time on some games. And this becomes very, very important. Many parents will say, well, I'm going to take away your laptop. And kids will often say, okay, well, if you don't want me to do my schoolwork, that's okay. But they're very clever, and they understand how they can actually hide what they're doing on some of these games. They'll go underneath a blanket in their bed and play these games for long periods of time. There is a greater need for unplugged time, and we have to fill that unplugged time with something else that's more positive. And this also requires closer parental mentoring and monitoring. So we really need to make sure that we're on top of what our children are actually doing, how much time they're gaming, what games they're using as well. We want to track changes in their behavior. So we don't expect children to go from 25 hours a week down to 0 hours per week. We want to be able to show children, and one of the things that we often do is graph this behavior in order to give concrete feedback to children or adolescents to show that it's actually improving. We have to understand the aggressive behavior or irritability when kids are trying to cut back their gaming. We've just taken away the most important or the most fun activity in their life. And that becomes very, very important. We want to encourage more social face-to-face activities, not just in terms of positive games, but also in terms of interacting with family members, with peers and friends, with other siblings. This becomes important. We need to look at establishing and maintaining realistic rules. One of the things that we'll often do is become very inconsistent. So you can't game today, you're punished, and yet the child then annoys us so much and nags us so much that we eventually give in. And what the child has learned is, if I keep nagging my parents, then there's a great opportunity for me to actually get my goal. Patience as a parent is the key. This is true for most things that we do as parents. It's the one thing that we often have very difficult time doing, where we often become very impulsive, and our behaviors often escalate problems rather than de-escalate those problems. Want to use positive reinforcement, understanding how difficult it is for young people to cut back their gaming. And we want to be able to show that we appreciate very much what they're trying to do. And it doesn't have to be every day of the week, the same amount of time. The weekends could be allow for more gaming to occur. We want to look at the underlying causes. We can help choose games together with adult supervision. We can develop a family media plan. We want to look at positive family activities that we could do together. And then we could review the games and the game ratings. So there is something called the Entertainment Software Rating Board, and they provide information about what's in a game or an app, so parents and consumers can make informed choices. And the ratings typically have three parts. There's a rating, the rating categories, the content descriptors, and the interactive elements. And you could see when the letters signifying the age appropriateness of the game. E is for everyone, E10 plus is for everyone over the age of 10, T for teenagers, M for mature, A for adults, and RP just means that the rating is actually pending. More strategies: try to reduce the number of hours and days of gaming. Once again, question is, can we go for abstinence or reduction? And my experience has been that reduction is the better way to go. You want to encourage breaks in games. You want to try to limit access to less than 2 hours a day. You want to set and maintain limits. And one of the key here is consistency. I once had a dad who said to his child, you can play for 2 hours a day. And what he did was he put his modem in a locked closet with a timer. So after the timer went off after 2 hours, the child had no more access to his or her games. What we also know is that that won't stop people from playing other forms of games, either through their console, or parents will be buying these games at a store where the software is actually sold. And we want to watch for signs of improvement and provide positive reinforcements for changes. This is typically true of many behaviors that we want to encourage in our children. More strategies: talk with your children, not at them. Try to listen to what they're saying. We often, as parents, are quiet when our children are talking, but we're actually not listening to what they're saying. And that becomes very, very frustrating for children and adolescents. So I think you want to really try to encourage talking with children. And the first part of that is encouraging active listening. Understand the different triggers that can result in individuals increasing their gaming behaviors. For example, there may be new releases of games. It may be advertising that they're seeing, or invitations to a friend's home to play a new game. And as I mentioned earlier, watch for credit card charges. There have been a number of documented cases where children or adolescents or even young adults have racked up tens of thousands of dollars on credit cards. And there are some what we call web blockers that will block out certain websites, and these can be for either gaming or it could be for gambling. And there are a number now that also block out pornography, which is also a growing problem amongst young people. What are some resources? If you go on this website called gamequitters.com, this was developed by a young man named Cam Adair, and Cam was a gamer himself and dropped out of school as a result of his gaming. And on that site, there are different motivations, different exercises, different explanations for not only gamers, but help for parents, help for professionals. There's also a book that's I find quite valuable, How to Help Children Addicted to Video Games, a guide for parents, and it's by Dr. Brent Conrad. And if you go on www.techaddictions.ca, you'll be able to find information about how to purchase that book to help you cut back your children's gaming addiction. There's also professional help. There are a number of psychologists now who are working with children and families who have or are experiencing gaming disorders. And it would be advisable if you think you need some help to actually seek out some of these people. For those of you who need some help, you could always call and leave a message at our offices, and we'll try to hook you up with someone who specializes in, or at least has some more knowledge about excessive gaming and gaming disorders. As I mentioned earlier, there have been a number of psychiatric webinars that I've been involved in where we've tried to train psychiatrists as well as psychologists and other mental health professionals in how to work with young people with gaming problems. There are some other concerns I just want to mention before I throw it open to questions. There's a new activity that we refer to as esports. And basically what esports are, there are teams of gamers that compete against each other. And I don't know if you can see this well, but down here in a stadium packed with people, watching people play various games. And this is growing in leaps and bounds. There are quite a few colleges and universities in the United States that are actually building e-gaming, esports gaming centers. And they're actually giving scholarships, athletic scholarships to these teams. I've been a consultant to the International Olympic Committee that is actually considering putting esports as an Olympic event. And this is one of the things that young people are really, really interested in becoming. So there are what we refer to as professional esports players, and they have huge followings of fans, and they can actually make large amounts of money by gaming in a competitive way. And as I mentioned earlier, gaming has become a strong vocation. So you can become a player like in the esports. You could become a blogger and go on and create your own blog to help young people or older people as well, I guess, try to improve their gaming experience and their success. And they also become gaming programmers. Many of the CJEPs in Montreal have gaming programs that are designed to help enhance gaming development in terms of graphic artists, as well as actual gaming scenarios. So I'm going to try to end it here and throw it open to any questions you might have or comments. And then we can try to address some of those concerns that you may be having. Thank you very much for your attention. And I hope you'll find it useful and the slides useful coming up where you can actually interact with us at McGill.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Jeff, for that very, very informative presentation. We're now throwing it open to questions. And we'll do that for approximately, I'd say 10, 15 minutes. We're at about 10 to 9 right now. So if you're welcome to turn your cameras on if you'd like, and either put a question in the chat box, raise your hand using the reactions if you'd like to ask a question, and you can ask it also by turning your mic on as well. So at the moment, I can only see about 4 people on my screen, but I'll make it so I can see a few more. So would anyone like to ask a question or any comments or thoughts? You shared a lot with us there, Jeff, from some stats to the good, the bad, the ugly, to the official definition. And, we really appreciate your experience over the years. Yes. Yes, I see. Pam, is that a hand?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Jeff, what portion of the people that you are seeing are adults that started gaming only in adulthood?
Well, I don't usually see those people because I'm a child and adolescent psychologist, so I tend to
that's a
focus
good
on
reason.
children. However, having said that, there is a large growing body of people who are middle-aged or young adults who are experiencing problems that never gamed when they were younger. People of my generation, we didn't have these games. We played Pong.
Yes, I played Pong.
Right. So we didn't have these things. We didn't have online. We didn't have a cell phone to walk around with that we can actually play these games. When we first started working in this area was when Nintendo first came out and was developed. And what we saw was that it was much more being played by young people as opposed to older people. But today, older people are also playing these games. People are walking around with laptops. People have iPads, personal devices. And so we see an identifiable number of people. You would be surprised to see the number of relationships that are in jeopardy because husbands are playing the games and wives are complaining that they're being neglected as a result of that.
I wouldn't be surprised. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. We've had a few questions come in the chat area. So
Sure.
If you'd like, I'll share those with you one at a time. The first one is, do you have any specific recommendations for ADHD with young adults? They seem to have issues knowing when it's time to turn it off.
Yeah, that's the big issue. How do you get people to turn it off? Even when you preset limits, time limits, they have difficulty adhering to those time limits. And so I think one of the things that we have to do is try to curtail that going backwards, try to limit the amount of time. And we could give young people warnings about when their time is coming due. So whether you use an hourglass or some other device with a timer on it to show that they're getting near the end. We can also give them information about this is, you need to start closing down your game now. Tell your friends that you're not able to participate because you have other work to do. Everyone can set time limits. That's the easy part. It's adhering to time limits. That's the tough part. The flip side of that is, in terms of the question, is that children with learning disabilities often like to engage in gaming because it becomes a fun way of interacting with their schoolwork or in terms of learning different concepts. The one thing about a game is that it never yells at a child. It never says, how many times do we have to go over this for you to learn this concept? It will do it as often as long as you keep that machine plugged in or you have your cell phone, it will keep doing that.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Jeff. The next question here is, can you provide any names of psychologists or psychological clinics in Montreal that people could contact for help?
So one of my former students, who's now graduated with her doctorate and is currently a psychologist at the Montreal Children's Hospital, also does work privately. Her name is Loredana Mochica. And if you email me, I'm more than happy to get you in touch with her. We've done a lot of research on gaming together. We've done some major studies in the United States with, we do it every 2 years. And we've added gaming into this now with about 7,000 adolescents, high school students. So Loredana is very interested in continuing working with family members who have children who have gaming problems.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jeff. And we'll put Jeff's email in the chat box shortly. We have a couple more questions.
Sure.
The next one is, could you give us an idea of how a family media plan would work? Could you expand on? Yeah.
Yeah, I think what you really want to do is you want to talk about things, the amount of time that we as a family will be allowing either our children to use media or us as adults to use media. So you can actually go online and they have different formulas depending upon the child's age, where you can actually develop a plan. So we can actually allocate a certain amount of time for games. We can actually allocate a certain amount of time for online schoolwork. We can allocate a certain amount of time for television. And I think by discussing that with our children, it becomes much easier. We tend to often, for young people, we tend to dictate all the information to our children rather than discussing with our kids. Even when my children were young, when they would say, I want to stay on the game for an hour, and I would say half an hour, and they would say, no, an hour. I would ultimately say, okay, so here's the other opportunity, half an hour or nothing. So you choose. Children like to be able to choose things as opposed to always being told what they could do. And if you set reasonable goals and reasonable expectations, you won't have any difficulties.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Here's another question that's come in. What would you suggest for someone whose husband is a longtime gamer and now their children are following suit? Yes.
Yeah, it's not a genetic issue here. It's more of a modeling issue. And so what I would suggest, and it's not unusual for parents to play games with their children online. or other non-online, you can do them on consoles as well. I think what you really want to do is explain to your husband that we really have to start cutting back. And this goes back to what I mentioned earlier, being a role model for our children. They can play the games when their kids are sleeping. But if they're playing constantly and you're saying to your son or daughter, put away your laptop, it just doesn't hold much water.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Thanks, Jeff. We have two more questions here.
Sure.
You're good with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, the next one has to do with, it says here, normally teenagers may stop playing at what time? I'm not sure if the person means, what time during the day, or does it happen that if they're in need, do they need to be in danger to really consider stopping gaming?
Well, I think one has to look at, one of the big concerns that we have is sleep deprivation. So if they're playing all night long, if they're taking their iPad or their computer or their cell phone into bed, and we're not monitoring that, that becomes really problematic. And we've had cases where parents tell us the kids are falling asleep in school because they're staying up all night playing games. Remember, these interactive online games are played by people all over the world. So what may be our nighttime may be their daytime somewhere else. And so I think it's really important for us to closely monitor our children in terms of the amount of time they're actually spending gaming. We can set rules and try to make sure that our children adhere to those rules. The rules should be reasonable, and we can ask children what they think how reasonable some of the rules are. We can modify those, and as I mentioned earlier, it's important for children to have some sort of say and input in these rules.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. And one more question here, starting with the statement saying educators are turning to computers and smartphones as pedagogical tools. More young people are taking their courses online because of COVID. And have you seen any impact on gaming patterns because of the increased time using technology?
Yeah, that's clear. We're seeing more and more young people gaming. We're seeing more and more young people gaming excessively. There are school boards now where when a child walks into the school, they must put their cell phone or their smartphone in a locker and it gets locked up until the end of the day, and then the child can actually take that out. It's not unusual for children, and that's come under a great deal of fire by parents who say, well, that's not right because my son or daughter needs to contact me if there's an emergency. Most of the schools actually say if there's an emergency, go to the office and we'll call your parent. But it becomes really important to try to limit the amount of time. We're also seeing smartphones being used by younger and younger children. It's not unusual for teenagers. When I used to take my daughter to school and one of her friends, they would sit in the back and they'd be texting each other information rather than actually communicating verbally the information. So I think we're moving to much more towards a digital age where everything is being done electronically. And I'm not sure how healthy that actually is.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you, Jeff. So at this point, we don't have any more questions. A few thank yous have been coming into the chat box. Oh, and here's one more question. We'll take this.
Sure.
Will be yeah, okay. At what age do you recommend a child to have their own cell phone or iPad?
That's a good question. If they're most young people don't do educational work on their smartphones, other than looking up certain facts occasionally via the internet. But what we know is that young people, 3 and 4-year-olds, are using iPads. But I will tell you, I went to a breakfast for a family breakfast pre-COVID, so there was no pandemic at the time, and we were sitting at a table, and there was a child who was about 12 years of age, sitting on his iPad playing consistently all kinds of games, and his mother, in order to encourage him to eat, was actually cutting his food. So I think, one has to know your child. One has to set limits in terms of the amount of time they're playing. One has to look at the kinds of games that they're playing. We know that young people are actually actively involved. We know that by the time children are in grades 4 and 5, they're getting their own cell phones as a way of keeping in touch with parents in case there are problems. But again, we have to monitor their use carefully. I'm not sure I would be getting a child who's 9 or 10 their own cell phone, to be honest. I think they should actually wait a little while longer. Now, if parents are not home or the child's home alone and there's no phone, because a lot of homes are no longer using house phones, but are using only cell phones, then I think that may be a different reason to do it.
Mhm. Thank you very much, Jeff. You've certainly given us so many practical tips and strategies for parents, and drawing on that such broad experience that you have working on the international level on this very relevant and hot topic, especially not only during these COVID times, but things have seemed to increase because everybody's doing so much online. So there's no more questions at the moment. So I think we'll wrap it up. If that,
You're free to always send me an email with any questions you might have. The slides will be available. I know I went through them fairly quickly. I wanted to leave time for questions, and I know many of you, it's getting kind of late for some of you, and you want to monitor your child's gaming behaviors.
right. And I put your email in the chat box, and on behalf of the Montreal Center for Learning Disabilities, we really want to thank you for, your time and sharing your expertise with us this evening. So
My
thank you very
pleasure.
much. And thank you everybody for joining. And there's lots of thank yous coming into the chat box now, Jeff. You can, if you want to have a look, you can.
Well, thank you.
Do that.
Thank you all for your kind attention. And as we say, good luck.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Thanks.